it's a series of small things that bring us to our knees, and sometimes it's something really big. But here's the thing, it's not a matter of if, but when we're all going to have some type of body slam. And oftentimes in your life, we have more than one body slam. And the whole idea of resiliency training is to get the pro-coping strategies before versus in the middle of your storm. So today you might only be thankful for that cup of coffee that you were sharing with your colleague, or the fact that it's Tuesday and not Monday, or the person sitting next to you. But tomorrow it might be that you're thankful for the cup of coffee, the fact that the sun is shining, and that you were able to get up and go run in the morning. The next day it might be that you're thankful for that cup of coffee, that you got to run in the morning, and that you are almost on Friday. So that's the whole idea of resiliency training, is to start looking at it. Those things, the skills that we do have, the skills that maybe we should invest a little bit more time into. Because the gratitude is the most basic of all of our resiliency skills. Because if you don't have something to be thankful for, it makes you a suicide risk. Because what are you getting up for in the mornings? What are you thankful for? And so it is about sometimes those really small things, a little bit of intentionality. So today you're going to hear about the 4 pillars of resiliency and why it matters. I'll reintroduce you to the toolbox. I promise you it won't be death by PowerPoint. You're going to hear my story, and while my story is a really big story, you all have stories. You all have things you've had to come back from. You've all been on your knees. And while you're going to hear how spiritual resiliency played a really big part of my way forward, my spiritual resiliency does include a church faith. Yours may or may not. There's a lot of different ways of looking at these pillars of resiliency, and so hopefully I'll get you to think about a few more of them. And while it's not a suck it up buttercup strategy, there is an element of suck it up buttercup in your resiliency story, because you have to make some choices. When you're on your knees, you have to make this choice to get back up, and that's not always the easiest thing to do. So babies are born with a natural level of resiliency. Consider 2 babies. You have the baby that's born very early, that somehow fights through things and survives and thrives in spite of how they started. Then you have those bigger babies that are born that should thrive and should survive that don't. That's what you're born with, but that's not the whole story. What comes next is the whole story. So when you have parents that invest in their children, you know, parents that get up in the morning and get their kids involved in scouts and sports and develop that relationship, introduce their kids to losing, you know, not just, you know, everybody gets a medal, and they introduce them to life challenges. That is how resiliency is built. Not all of us have that kind of home growing up. It takes intentionality for every one of us. Next slide. So this is the really old version of the chart. I use it because it's easier to see than the grayscale version that we have. And I'm going to do a quick review of the 4 pillars, all right? But I'm not going to stay there. So we all know about the mental. That's about that thought process, you know, of getting up in the morning, going to work, making the good choices that we do. The positive thinking, the gratitude falls into that. So in the middle of your storm, when you're trying to figure out what do I have to be thankful for, I wish I was anyone but me. That's that part of having to think through it. Physical is about a whole lot more than running or exercise. It's also about sleep, and people forget that. If you're tired, things look 20 times worse. And so when we have people that get by on 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night or have really disrupted sleep, it's easy to downward spiral because you're tired. And when you're tired, things look bad. It's also about the food you put into your system. I'm not going to tell you that I eat healthy all the time, because I don't. I make bad choices. I like my French fries. I like my ice cream. Blue Seal ice cream is really good. But it's about what you do on a day-to-day basis with the physical resiliency. Spiritual is the one I'm going to do next, and I'm saving social for last on purpose. Spiritual is about more than your church faith. It's about why you're doing what you're doing. If you're in the military for a paycheck, get out and go do something else, all right? It's about your why. It's about why are you getting up in the morning? What do you stand for? If your values are different from the military values as a person, then you really should be doing something else. And this is not to chase everybody out of the door here. It would shock me if you all started leaving. But it is about that purpose, that sense of direction that we all have and what you stand for. So we get stuck on spiritual being a church faith. But you know, there's a lot that goes into that. Consider for a second a sense of humor. Humor, genuine humor, not that faked humor, in the middle of your storm is really big. Because humor produces optimism, optimism produces hope, and hope is part of that spiritual resiliency component. Music also falls under this. So if you were to get a hold of my iPod, I'd be very embarrassed. Because you would first see a lot of patriotic songs, you would see a lot of church songs, you would see some oldies, you would see a lot of current songs, but you would also see music with a lot of bad words, all right? Because sometimes music gives you the opportunity to think, or at least say in your head, some of the things you would never say out loud, all right? So that all falls under your spiritual. Also, the people in your life that have influenced you, either good or bad. So sometimes you might make decisions not to do something based on a negative influence in your life. That all falls under the spiritual resiliency. I say social for last because most people in here would say that that is not their weakest area. Men, I'm going to pick on you for just a second. You spend your 20s and 30s establishing yourself in a career, oftentimes starting your families. So you get up in the morning, you go to work, you come home from work at the end of the day, you take care of family. What do you do tomorrow? Same thing. All right, the longer you're married, and this is not a bad thing about being married, I promise, but the longer you're married, the less likely you are to invest in hobbies and 911 friends. You know, the ones that know you as well as you know yourself. The ones that will call you on the carpet and say, listen here, you know, you're not behaving the way you usually do. You're blowing up all the time. You are punching holes in the wall. You're drinking too much. You're not talking to anybody. You need to go get help. Do you want to talk about it? However they want to put it. So what happens when your body slam is your family? Somebody in your family or your career? Then who do you have to go to? So we know exactly what to say. When somebody says to you, how are you doing today, ma'am? What would you say?
Doing very well, thank you.
Whether you are or you're not. We know what to say. Every one of us does. And men, you're really good at that. Just fine, thank you. All right? I'm really good at that too, promise. The whole idea of, and women, you're not off the hook. You're in the military, so every 2 to 4 years you move. And if you're moving every 2 to 4 years, we get really good at hellos and goodbyes. We'll keep in touch on Facebook. But how much do we share of our vulnerability on Facebook? How much do people really see on Facebook? It takes a lot more intentionality to establish that social pillar or that social domain in our military world. So the reason why that becomes very important is this. You spend 20 years in the military, maybe more. You walk through the door in a military uniform one day. The next day, you retire and you walk through that same door in civilian clothes. Who am I? Where do I fit? Whether or not you have the same kind of job, you get treated different. You get treated much different when you make that change. Second, oftentimes, where do I want to live? I might want to go back home and live at home, except that people have moved on in those 20 years. And when you go home and visit, it's not the same thing to go back and live there. Kids start leaving the house. Oftentimes health problems start cropping up in your 40s and 50s, and that's a dirty little, trick. You don't know when that's going to happen. Kids start leaving the house. Marriages often implode about that time. And here's the thing. It's because there's so much change and so much stress going on in their lives. And all of a sudden, something that you thought you would never think about might become your go-to strategy. So when we talk about resiliency training as being a mandatory thing, it really does take some intentionality. It takes some preparation for those storms you don't see coming, because that's the whole key. You don't see them coming. One day you wake up in the morning, you go about your day, and bam. All right, next slide. So these are 3 of my children at the Air Force Academy graduation. If there's anybody in here that knows any of these kids, you can't tell them I'm talking about them, all right? That's the deal, all right? Because I have 5 children, 4 of them are in the military. The one in the middle once said that resiliency training is stupid, all right? I'll just throw it out there. It's easy to say when everything in your life is going well. It is easy to say when you have 2 parents that invest in you, when you're the top student in your high school class, when you are a really good athlete, when you have lots of friends. It's not so easy to say when the hits start coming and keep coming, or when you have a really big hit. And so that's what I want you to do, is to come into this training with a little bit of an open mind. I'm going to tell you my story, and it is a huge story. But remember, resiliency is not about the big stories most of the time. It's about the smaller ones that we deal with every single day. Next slide. So, on April 27th of 2011, my husband of 23 years was killed in action in Afghanistan. So let me back up a little bit from there. My husband came to the United States at the age of 12, knowing 2 words of English, USA for USA and Sumatimas for sometimes. He spent 16 years enlisted, 10 as an officer. I worried about him a whole lot more when he was an enlisted guy fighting the wars in South America behind sandbags than I did when he went to Afghanistan as a trainer and an advisor. I didn't worry about my husband. He was supposed to be in a safe place. He was an Air Force Academy professor. And that's kind of the thing about body slams. You know, you think you know that you're safe. You think you know that I'm not going to get sick, or I think I know that I'm in a safe position. So Phil had just finished his PhD 5 days before he deployed. He volunteered to go. The person he ate lunch with every single day is the person that got him. All right, somebody in a friendly uniform. Somebody he should have been able to like and trust. You know, life isn't always fair. So that day, I was teaching, I was at school, I was teaching. At 6:30 in the morning, the MSN ticker tape flashes across my computer and says that there were 5 confirmed dead at the Kabul airport shooting. All right, and then it went to 7, and then it went to 9. And I thought to myself, thank God my husband is not there. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to go to a place called Shindad, which that's not what he called it. He called it a bad word. And he got diverted en route because he spoke 10 languages fluently. They kept him at a place called Kandahar, and because I'm geographically stupid, I didn't realize Kandahar was part of the Kabul airport area. So he was there, and I went next door and told the music teacher, thank God my husband's not there. Thank God my daughter is not there, because my daughter was deployed to Bagram about the same time too. When they came to get me at 1:32 in the afternoon, I was teaching 32 first graders in my gym, PE. The principal and the counselor showed up. And I thought, I'm losing my job. My school district in Colorado Springs had declared bankruptcy, essentially. And they were letting teachers go that day, the ones that were not getting their contracts renewed. And I had volunteered to be the one to be let go because I knew that when Phil came home, we would be PCSing for 4 years before we came back. So I thought, you know, not a big deal, I'll be the one to go. As I'm walking up the hallway behind my principal, I see a sea of media trucks outside of the school. And I thought, crap, I'm going to have to give an interview about losing my job and be gracious on TV and not say that I volunteered to be the one to be let go. I hit the office. All the naughty kids are running out. Everybody's staring at me, and I'm thinking, well, everybody knows but me. That's crap. I never thought, and that's the whole point of a body slam, you never think it's going to be you. And if you haven't had one yet, you know what? Unfortunately, it's not a matter of if, but when. So the naughty kids are running out. The media did know before me because a general went on television at 10:30 in the morning, and while she did not give away Phil's name, she said words like, today we lost one of our own. If you're the only Air Force Academy professor that's deployed, how long do you think it took them to figure out where I was, who my kids were, and where they were? So 2 of my children found out on Facebook. One of them found out by overhearing 2 of the Air Force Academy professors talking about it as he walked into class. One of them found out by hearing from a secondary friend whose mom I was teaching with while I was being notified. My daughter found out the right way only because her cell phone was dead. When she plugged it into the cigarette lighter, when she got into the car, she had 32 missed phone calls because that was all the message thing would hold. 5 were from mortuary affairs, a bunch were from her brothers, and a bunch were from people that she had gone to the academy with. And while she knew something bad had happened, she thought something bad had happened to me because I'm the one that has medical issues and I run a whole lot of marathons. And I'm the one that puts myself into those positions. She never thought it was going to be her father. So, as we get into the office and my principal ducks into the nurse's station, I see the sea of blue uniforms. And I drop to my knees keening. It's not something that you can project how you're going to think. As I'm looking around at who's making those awful sounds, I realize it's me. But here's what I will tell you. The first tool I grabbed was this. When I fell to my knees keening, one thought crossed my mind. How can I claim to have faith if in my darkest hour I turned from my faith? I chose to fall into my church faith. Yes, my spiritual resiliency does include a church faith. Again, yours may or may not. But that was that first big tool I grabbed out of my toolbox. Your big tool may not be that. And you may think it's that, and it may not be that. But that was the first thought that crossed my mind, was that in particular. I don't remember a whole lot about that day, other than getting dropped off at my house all by myself, with the media beating on my doors, the media taking pictures through my windows. It was horrible, all right? And if you are a commander, I will just tell you, do not leave people in the middle of their crisis alone. Have a plan. I get to Dover, and the lady that picked me up at Dover said to me, Linda, I know that this is overwhelming. I hadn't cried in 42 years, and I couldn't stop crying. It was overwhelming to be on an airplane and having everybody stare at me as I'm breaking over and over and over again. She had done some research on me, and that's kind of the key if you are a supervisor too. She said to me, Linda, you don't feel like running today. I know you don't. I'm a runner. I've been running for more than 42 years. I'm going to pick you up. I'm going to take you to a running trail. Carry your cell phone, and I don't carry a cell phone when I run unless it's a Disney races so I can get the pictures, you know. And she said, you don't feel like it today, but take it out there and call me when you want me to pick you up. I will find you. It will make what's coming next easier. If you want somebody to run with you, I can't run, but I can get somebody to run with you. I didn't want somebody to run with me. I wanted to run. And during that time that I was running, the 2 hours I was running, I was able to ground myself enough to be able to figure out how I wanted Phil's funeral to look. I knew I couldn't have an open casket. I also knew that because we were so involved in Colorado Springs, and I can't even begin to tell you how involved we were, but between the scouts and the sports that we coached and the church that we went to, and while Phil was getting his PhD, he had substitute taught every single day in my school. So imagine all those kids that were impacted by military loss for the very first time. And their fathers and mothers were still in military uniforms. All the cadets he taught, and he was Teacher of the Year while he was there. I didn't want it to be a military funeral per se. Everybody knew what Phil looked like as a military hero. But he was more than a military hero to me. He was my best friend, he was my husband, he was the father of my kids, and a really great father. And he had a wicked sense of humor. One that I wanted people to hear about. Not just, all the great things he did in terms of his languages or his military career. So during those 2 hours, I was able to get enough control to figure out that I wanted a slideshow of his life, of all the fun things, you know, different things that he had done, different things he was involved in. Music, because remember, music's part of the spiritual resiliency. And how I wanted it to look. So whether you are a runner or not, having something that helps you center or ground during that time when you're in the middle of your storm is critical. And for the men in here, if running is not your thing and you only do it because of the military, find something. Because if your storm is your health or somebody in your family or your career, that's what puts you at risk, is you don't invest in yourselves like you should. All right? So my second tool was running, falling into my faith. And when you're outside, by the way, it gets rid of your options. You know, think about this. I cannot run on a treadmill. If you see me in a treadmill, something is very, very wrong. It's either really bad weather, like in Missouri, you know, during the winter sometimes, or Boston the year that they had all the snow, or it's so stinking hot that I can't stand it. I hate the treadmill that much. When you're outside, there's something about the elements. You're not surrounded by pictures. You're not surrounded by people wanting something from you. You're not surrounded by all that noise and chaos. Outside is where I ground myself. So those were the first two big tools that I found in my toolbox. Would you go to the next slide? So right now, you've heard how running in faith goes into that. The third tool that I found was something I didn't see, wouldn't have told you I would have found. Right after Phil died, people wanted me to talk about how he died. I didn't want to talk about I didn't want to talk about anything. How are you? Just fine, thank you. I went back to work 5 days after Phil was buried. I went back to work 5 days after he was buried because those 9 hours a day were the only time in my life where something felt normal. All right? And that was big. I didn't want to talk about how I was feeling, what I was going through, because do you think it was great? Nobody wants to hear that. When you're walking through a storm with somebody, most people have the capacity to walk with you about 3 to 4 weeks. It is exhausting to walk with somebody that's going through a major storm. All right? And I tell you that because if you're walking through it with somebody, put on your own oxygen mask. For me, I started to write. At the time, I had 26 Facebook friends. And it's kind of embarrassing how many I have now. Those 26 Facebook friends, 5 were my children. 1 was my mom. A couple were my aunts. A few people I worked with. Nothing great shakes. I didn't spend a whole lot of time on Facebook. I started to write as a way to express myself and to let people know how I was feeling, never expecting what came next. What came next is people kept sharing my post. Somebody found it, wanted to turn it into a book. All right? I wasn't writing for that purpose. That writing became a way of me purging my feelings that I couldn't talk about anywhere. So that mental resiliency was something I never would have thought of. So I'm going to go back to the story for just a second. When this happened, I was so shy I couldn't even walk into my teacher lounge. I couldn't walk into my teacher lounge because I didn't know where to sit. You know, it looked like everybody else had groups of people to hang out with. I didn't have a group of people to hang out with, and my lunchtime overlapped 2 different lunches because of the position I was in. And so I avoided the lounge at all costs. So to be assaulted basically with the media knowing before I knew, and having to deal with the media from step 1, was more than overwhelming on every front. I get to Dover, and while we're standing there at Dover, I want you to imagine something. I have 5 children, 18 to 28 at the time, 4 of them in military uniforms. Make no mistake, if you're in a military uniform, it doesn't matter who you are, you know how to behave. All right? You know exactly what to do. If you're in a military uniform, it doesn't matter if you're 18 years old and you're the youngest cadet ever to graduate from the Air Force Academy. Your eyes are running, your nose is running, snot's running down your face. And these people that you've only heard about on television, the Vice President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, these 4-star generals coming up and wanting to shake your hand, it is overwhelming. It is incredibly overwhelming. And the longer you're in the military, the stronger your warrior ethos kicks in. And you think your families are immune? No. If you have a spouse that's been moving with you as you've been in all these years, she knows how to behave too, I promise. All right? And she knows what words to say. You feel like you have to set the example for those people coming after you, or those people that are a little less time in the military. So as I'm standing there and I'm watching my youngest son break over and over and over again, and this is a part of the story that gets me every time, I found my voice. I found my voice because I cared more about my son than I cared about my own discomfort. So I said to the media, leave my kids alone. If you leave my kids alone, I will give you any interview that you want, and my kids can come with me if they so choose to do that. Finding that control was huge. And I'm not saying that your control would look like that in the middle of your storm. You can't control a lot, but those choices that you make actually help. Feeling like you have some control over the way it's going to look. And so I started talking then. I found a voice that I didn't have for almost 50 years, because I was almost 50 when Phil was killed. The writing was the next part of it, was writing to talk about my feelings. Wrote the book. Didn't want to make money off of Phil's death. So I started looking for a place to donate the money and found an organization called the TAPS, Tragedy Assistance Program. I'd never heard of them. They provide outreach and care for all families, siblings, grandparents, wives, girlfriends, whatever, of people that lose somebody in the military, whether it be through line of duty death, killed in action, illness, whatever. They provide support and empowerment groups. So I donated the proceeds. That became a really big deal because it allowed me to find a voice and a way forward to make something positive come out of the worst day of my life. Now here's the thing, you can't control the cards you're dealt, but you can choose how you want to play them. All right? If you would have told me 8 years ago I'd be the person that has had as many opportunities as I've had, or that I would have a voice on military loss, I probably would have thrown up. Because this isn't who I was for 50 years. For 50 years I was the one that was comfortable in the shadows of my own family. I was really good at being the positive spin master every time we moved. I was really good at supporting my family, and I was proud of that. Really proud of that. I was a stay-at-home mom for 16 years. Went back to work when my youngest child hit 6. I never got too attached to a job or a house or any people, because in a military life, hello, goodbye. And I knew what my job was. So if you're in here married and you say, well, you know, my wife doesn't have that warrior ethos. Oh, yes, she does. She knows what to do to make it easy for you, or your husband, to make it easy for you to move. So you think that you know who's going to be there for you in the middle of your storm. Well, let me tell you how that works. My own mom didn't know what to say to me. So here's what she did for an entire year. She forwarded me prayer emails. For the record, that is not helpful. Don't do that, all right? I had a nun that taught me in school for many years, and she sent me a message. I'm really sorry about your husband, but why can't we all get along? That was not helpful, all right? You have people with mixed feelings about what you do and who you are. My own family member said you must be really rich, you know, because of how how Phil died. Well, for the record, if he'd worked 4.5 more years, he would have paid for every one of that life insurance policy. All right? But people assume that you're going to get rich off of the way that your spouse dies. My family, my kids. We had the closest knit family that you could ever want. We put the fun in dysfunctional, all right? We enjoyed each other. We hung out together. We just liked each other. My close-knit family imploded, and here's why. How can you fix the hurts in your children when you can't fix them in yourself? Think about that for a second. 4 of my kids are in military uniforms. They still have to get up today and go to work. They have deployed to Afghanistan. They have deployed all over the place. They still have to face it every single day. The one that wasn't in military uniform, he felt shoved aside and unimportant. So my oldest son is a doctor in the Air Force. He wanted to be the family patriarch. Nobody wanted that because they had a good father. So then he felt resentful that nobody wanted that. Second son, Army. He had just got back from Iraq, had minor PTSD, was getting his feet on the ground, working with the most severely wounded patients at Walter Reed Hospital. He's an Army nurse. He asked to be retrained because he couldn't deal with it after his dad was killed the way he was killed. And the Army said no. It cost him his career. He's medically retired. All right. Daughter is calm, and she just got back from Bagram. She had been picked up to be an Air Force Academy professor, and her friends told her, "You're only getting that because of how your dad was killed." Now, she'd already been picked up to do all of that. But then it put her in a position where she wouldn't let anyone talk about her dad. She wouldn't mention how her dad died. She asked me to take off my bracelet when I wore my bracelet around her because she didn't want people thinking she got things based on how her dad died. I'm going to come back to my 4th child in just a minute. My baby was barely 18. He had already been picked up to go to Russia with the Air Force Academy, the summer immersion program as well as the fall. The Air Force Academy asked him to drop out for a year and take a year off. And he said, "No, I'm not doing that. Not only am I not doing that, I'm going to Russia." And the Air Force Academy said, "You can't do that." And he said, "Oh, yes, I can." He said, "Or if you make me drop out, I will take my options." Now, he had him over a barrel because he had a perfect SAT and ACT score. Most of us don't have that. I don't have that, just so you know that. Nowhere near that. They did let him go to Russia. And that's a key thing right now when you're listening to this briefing too, is trusting yourself. There will be a lot of people that tell you how you should respond, or what you should do, or how you should do it, or the time frame. Nobody tells you to get over being happy, but they do tell you to get over being sad. All right? Think about that for a second. So for him, he trusted himself enough to go to Russia. For him, it was the right thing to do because he was very quiet, kind of like his mom, very shy. I'm not as quiet and shy anymore, I promise. Right, Jen? But he did. He went to Russia for those 9 months. And during that 9 months, he was able to get his feet on the ground. I told you I'd come back to my last child, my 4th one. Alex is still derailed. What do 19-year-olds want to do when they're going through a body storm? And what do their friends want to do with them? They want to get them drunk, they want to get them laid, they want to get them anything they can to distract them from what they're going through. Here's what it's cost my son. He's in rehab for the 3rd time. All right? Before that, he hadn't done any of those things. He's struggling. This is a child that got into the Air Force Academy that opted not to go. All right? Had a full ride scholarship, every penny paid to DU, which is a very expensive school. And I will tell you, I am scared for my son's life. So in the storms, when you're making decisions, and it may seem really simple to pick up a bottle of alcohol, and there will be so many people, that's the very first thing my friends wanted me to do, get drunk. You know what? I didn't, and you'll hear a little bit more about that as we go through the story. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, those people that pick up the bottle and start having a problem with it don't think that they're going to have a problem when they pick up the bottle and start drinking to obliterate the thoughts or the reactions. You know, well, it's really overwhelming to be crying all the time or feel like you have nothing to get up for in the morning a little bit. At least you're feeling something. And if you're feeling something, you can move forward through it and make choices and have control. And again, your choices may not echo mine, but it's thinking ahead to what do I have in place right now that I think I would be using? Where do I need to invest a little bit more time? All right? Now, so moving beyond that, oh, by the way, social. I forgot that part. You know, here's the interesting thing about military loss. You walk through the door, whether you're a spouse or military, you know where you fit, right? Military loss. Well, you become the visible reminder of what could happen to everybody else. Not only do you become the visible reminder, people don't know what to say to you, so they stop talking to you. Or my personal favorite with the spouses is this. Your moral compass must have changed because you're suddenly single. So you might be hitting on my husband. And you think that doesn't happen. I promise you, it really does happen. I got called into the general's office not even 2 months after Phil died and told to behave myself. And I hadn't done anything except give the autopsy pictures to somebody to hold on to. And his wife thought I was hitting on him. Now, you can't fake this stuff. And I'm going to tell you right now, I am so pro Air Force that my ringtone is the Air Force song, my text tone is Reveille, my license plate in Missouri said Air Force Girl. I am still pro Air Force. But things can and do go wrong in the middle of your storms. People can and do say the wrong things. And unfortunately, if it can happen at the Air Force Academy, it can happen here too. So if you're in a position of dealing with this, it is something that as leaders you need to think about, as well as personal. What are you going to do with your family? You know, and I want to back up and just say one more thing, just because I realize who might be here in the audience. You know, Colorado's a no probate state. We had a will where everything went to me. Our bank accounts were all joint bank accounts. I'm on my way to Dover, and all of my every bank account freezes. I can't use any credit card. And the reason why that happened was the minute that they knew that Phil died, we had one access point through USAA. So username, we had like Ambard PL. And then the same we had one password. We both went into it the same way. Well, if the person that sets up the account is the person that's deceased, you can't access anything. So imagine trying to fix that while you're waiting on a form 1300, you know, and having to go into a bank right after Phil died. You don't get that stuff right away. My teaching salary got dumped into our bank account and I couldn't get to it. I had $40 in my purse. So if you're in a position of leadership and you're thinking about how can I help my people before they deploy, I always tell everybody I know, have $500. And if you don't need it while they're deployed, use it as reunion money. Because when you go to Dover, even though you get a death gratuity, oftentimes, I didn't get it until I came back from Dover. So if you're sitting here waiting on it, and by the way, they dumped the death gratuity into the bank account that was frozen. So how do you access any of that stuff? So, you know, my bank account was growing, but I couldn't get to any of that. The Air Force tells you you have 1 year to move. Not just the Air Force. It's waiverable up to 3 years, but a spouse would not know that. Most people in here probably don't know that. So those were all things that you deal with right away, decisions you have to make. Now imagine if my kids had been younger for a second. You know, if you have young kids, the only stability they have when everything is falling apart at home is school. Their friends at school, the teachers at school, the routine at school, the sports teams they're on, the scouts that they're on. You need that time to allow the family to heal a little bit. So families should at least have that option or know about that option right away about having that 3-year waiverable amount. Because your kids are more than 25 times more likely to be diagnosed with severe mental problems later based on the trauma that they have as kids with either wounded in action, killed in action, suicide. Spouses, same thing, 25 times more likely to be severely depressed or have problems, right? When did I know my kids were going to be okay? As we're driving on to the Air Force Academy for the funeral, We get to the gate. The Westboro Yahoo Baptist people are outside of the gate. It was the day after Osama bin Laden had been killed. So we were at ThreatCon Charlie. Phil was the first of the 9 to be buried. Media was everywhere. I hand him my ID card, and the gate guard says, "You can't come on." "What do you mean I can't come on?" He says, "This ID card isn't valid." And I said, "What do you mean this ID card isn't valid?" And he said, "It shows that your spouse separated from the Air Force after 26 years with no benefits, nothing." The Air Force had miscoded his death. So I was kicked out of Deers. I couldn't get on. And my kids are like, "Okay, Mom, get out of the car. We'll pick you up after the funeral." And it was genuine humor. It's not something that you can fake. And genuine humor in your storms are like spark plugs. You know, it's like little sparks of, okay, I'm capable of feeling something besides horrible. And so I'm talking my way onto my husband's funeral. Look at the flag, look at the sign, Google me if you have to, and let me into my husband's funeral. The poor little A1C. He did let me on, all right? But could you imagine being that guy? And the second time is after the funeral, and we were driving through the cadet area. The streets were packed. I mean, just incredible. And my kids start giggling in the back. And I'm like, "Can you guys show any decorum until at least we're through here?" And they're like, Mom, you got to see this. You got to see this." And they pass forward this card that somebody had given me. And maybe knowing your audience is important, but it was the right thing for my family, okay? We're kind of like that. And in the card was a picture. I don't remember what the card said, and somewhere I have it. And the picture was of the guy that had taken my husband's place working for the general that had accidentally let the cat out of the bag. And this guy was sitting at her desk that she was so proud of. He looked naked. He was not naked. All right? He had his untied combat boots on top of her desk, a big Mexican sombrero hat on his head, and a margarita cup, toasting my husband. And I laughed. I don't remember laughing for a very long time after that, but I do remember laughing and realizing that while it might be far from that day, there was going to come a day where I would find fun again. I would find the laughter again. And there are a lot of people in the middle of a storm that make jokes because they don't know what to say. That's not the kind of humor I'm talking about. I'm talking about genuine humor, where you can find something funny. The widows, when we get together, we have gallow humor. It's okay. It really is okay. But it's knowing your audience and knowing who that you are responding to. I already told you about my music. Now, one of the things that happened when Phil died was I stopped sleeping. I would get up 20 times a night. I don't remember sleeping more than 20 minutes. I'd fall asleep and feel like I slept for hours, and I'd wake up and it'd be 20 minutes later. In the middle of your storm, that sleeping becomes really critical, because if you're not sleeping, you tend to, number one, get sick, and number two, downward spiral. And there are some things that you can do to talk about it, that can help with that. And I'll talk about it in just a little bit. Next slide. All right. We talked about friends and people. There are some choices there. You know, the choice number one for me was how I wanted the funeral to look. Choice number two was to go back to work 5 days after Phil was buried. That was the right choice for me. Because if I had sat in my house looking at all of our family pictures and all the things that I thought, you know, I thought I knew how my life was going to go, I wouldn't have been able to get up in the morning. But if I had to get up in the morning and go to work, and I'm not telling you that's what you need to do during your storm, but what I am telling you is for me it worked because I had to get up in the morning and shower. I had to get up in the morning and get dressed. I had to get up in the morning and try to force food down my throat because I was teaching PE and coaching track. And so that was huge. Now, you've heard me say this, I can't change what happened to me, but I can choose how I want to play those cards. And initially during your storm, you're breathing through it 1 second at a time, 1 minute at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 mile at a time, 1 marathon at a time. A marathon is 26.2 miles. I've done well over 160 marathons. I think I'm about to do 170 in the next week and a half in the Himalayas. All right? There is never one of them where I have thought to myself, I've got this in a basket. I know it's going to hurt more. I know it's going to hurt more tomorrow. I know I'm going to want to quit. I know it's going to hurt more the next day. But here's the thing in your storm. Just like a marathon, I don't have to look at 26.2. I have to look only at the step in front of me. So while I may fall down, I may get lost, I may need to take a rest, and I may need to stop for a little bit. I can get there if I look just at the one step in front of me. And while it's going to hurt, when I cross that finish line and they put that medal around my neck, I'm going to feel good about pushing through the pain. I'm going to feel good about getting there. And so when you're in the storm, initially I thought through things basically 5 minutes at a time. Chunk your time. All right? You know, it used to be where I thought about Phil all day long. There was never a minute where I was not thinking about him pretty much. Then it would be where it wouldn't be quite so much. I didn't think in terms of it's only been 2 days or it's only been 2 months. Pretty soon it became looking at it's been this many years or whatever. And that's kind of humbling too, because it's a little bit hard when you realize, wait a minute, he's not my first thought or my last thought anymore of every day. Because you thought, if you've been married a long time, you know what I'm talking about. You just don't imagine life without that person. You don't, and if they're your body slam, it's almost, it almost feels, I wouldn't say guilt is the word, but kind of where you feel funny about them not being your first and last thought, or where you start considering moving on, or where you consider what next. Forever's a long time when you're by yourself. And so breathing through the hard times, you don't have to know all your answers. You don't even have to know what you're going to do tomorrow or what you're going to do this afternoon. You have to know what you're going to do right this second, being fully present in what's happening in this minute. And then preparing. Next slide. All right, yes, that's exactly how I look when I run usually, all right? I told you I wrote a book, Found Taps. And a lot of my public speaking and a lot of my military loss awareness has come through my running, going through with running. You know, I didn't sit there and expect to be the face of Air Force loss. That's what happened. You don't know how it's going to turn out. I would give anything not to be that, but I am that person. And because I am that person, it comes down to, all right, you know what, let me make something positive come out of this, because it honors not only who I want people to see me as, but also honors the life of Phil, who never made it past 44. He had just had his 44th birthday. Next slide. All right, so there's a problem with this picture. Who can tell me? There's no tie. This is his last enlisted photo. He had a line number for Senior Master Sergeant when he got his commission. Now, we all have people in our life that matter, right? We all have people and reasons why we do things. In large part, when my kids were growing up, I did certain things because I wanted to set the example for them. So things like going to church, things like exercise, or reading to my kids, or a routine, or teaching my kids not to lie, or teaching my kids to give back to somebody. They were all people that influenced my behaviors and why I did what I did. All right? Would you go to the next slide? That's what they look like about 7 years ago. All right? They definitely look a lot different than that now. They're still in my life, and I still do things to influence my kids. But here's the thing. Their opinions matter a little bit more than they did when they were 2 and 3. You have people that come into your life that will tell you how you should behave or what you should do. And it doesn't matter if it's parents or people you work with, your kids. So I grew up in Boise, Idaho and Portland, Oregon. I went to school where everybody pretty much looked like I did. And you know, everybody pretty much had the same values. It wasn't until I was 21 and exposed to the military, where I got exposed to a very global community. And I started to see beyond some of the values that I had been raised with. Now, those people in my life are still really important. For example, I'll talk about my parents for a minute. My mom drives me batty, all right? But she has some good traits. She was involved with me in school. She was involved as a mom, overly involved, but she was good. She's very social, which I am not very social. She has a strong heart and she has strong faith. All of those things are values that I've taken from my mom, or at least I can look at and appreciate in my mom. But her value when Phil was killed was that I would move home to Boise, Idaho, and live in Boise, Idaho, where she wouldn't bother me unless she thought I needed it. Well, you know what that equates to? Every single day, because she would think I needed it. Just calling to check on you? No. The second thing that she thought was, after a year, she drugged me to the senior center in Boise, Idaho every time I went to visit. First off, I'm not a senior. Just saying. Second off, she drugged me to the senior center with this in mind, that I might meet some nice older widower and settle down in Boise, Idaho. I was like, ooh. And so she would introduce me as Linda, her daughter, the war widow, which is not my favorite, okay? And she would give all these older guys my phone number. I was not interested in dating at that time, and I certainly did not want to date the people she was. No. I could take care of myself, Mom. Thank you very much. My father, when I grew up, taught me the love of reading, crossword puzzles, faith, family, love of outside, hard work, and noticing people in life that didn't have as much as we had. But my father had a flaw. Those are all the positives. Those are like those positive votes, you know, the reasons why I do certain things. But there's one big decision I made at the age of 12, and it's based on my father's flaw. My dad was an alcoholic, and he was a functioning alcoholic. At the age of 12, I decided not to drink. Now, I've never had a drink of alcohol in my life. I'm not starting now, I promise. But here's the thing. You can take negative behaviors and turn it into a positive choice. All right? It doesn't mean that you dislike the people in your life or that you can't value the good that they bring to your life. Well, acknowledging that maybe something unfair happened, or maybe their values aren't quite your values. That's a huge influence in my life in terms of a choice that I made early on. And we all have people in our lives, and we all come from different ways. So if you've come from a background or a childhood that wasn't so nice, you have choices. You have choices to be a different parent than the way your parent was. You have choices to be successful. You have choices to make something of yourself. You have choices to reach out and give something back to somebody else. You don't have to let the bad things in your life that happen to you define who you are as an adult. It can define who you are as in a good way versus your negative choices. Next slide, please. All right, so as we near the end, if you look at this picture, it's my daughter doing the 100-mile death march in the Netherlands. Everybody around her is having a good time. Emily is not having a good time. She's that cute little redhead in there. All right, you see the pain on her face. All right, she's just praying for this walk to be finished. Sometimes it's like that, where everybody around you is doing okay and you're not the one doing okay. And again, it is about trusting yourself, making choices, leaning in on each other, carrying each other through those storms. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. The last one. That one here. So, 2 years after Phil was died, and this is the last story I'm going to end with, I was at the Boston Marathon. Yeah, that Boston Marathon. 2013. All right? I was one stoplight from the finish line. I had finished 26 miles. I could see the finish line. I could smell the finish line. The first boom hit. I didn't know what it was. As I'm processing what that boom was, and the guy next to me said, "Are they doing cannons at the finish line?" And I'm thinking, no, they never do cannons at finish lines. The second boom hit. I ran for my life. I didn't have time to get turned around. I had a front row seat to everything that happened that day. I found myself cowering under a table in the Dunkin' Donuts store, about a half a mile away from the finish line. I can't tell you how I got there. Obviously, I ran there. I can't tell you I can't tell you anything other than somebody dragging me out from underneath the table and talking to me. All right, here's what I will tell you. You know, it hurts sometimes, and it hurts a lot sometimes. And sometimes you think it's going to be a major storm that puts you on your knees. It's not always a major storm. Sometimes it's a series of small things that put you there. I made a choice in the aftermath of that day to start fighting for it. You know, in the middle of your storm, you're just breathing. But you have a choice. You have a choice. This is the suck it up, buttercup part of the story. You know, how am I going to let this define me? Who am I going to be? Can this make me a better person? What are my values? My values have certainly changed. The people in my life that are important to me, I try to invest in them much more than I used to. Where it was once really important to keep making rank, it isn't anymore. I'm retiring out of here. I have a plan. My plan is to retire to Colorado. My plan is to settle down with my Chapter 2. I do have a plan. It comes down to our choices about where we're going to go. You can't change your cards, but you can choose how you want to play them. And that's what I want to end with. Thank you.